All right, outlets nearly ready to spark up sales. That was a story on July 19th. NSLC President and CEO Brett Mitchell recently described Nova Scotia's co-location of cannabis and alcohol sales in favorable terms. Quote, "We have a very unique situation here. But selling cannabis in liquor stores is a public health risk, not a point of pride." So says the letter to the editor-writer who joins us on the broadcast this afternoon, a registered clinical psychologist, professor in the Department of Psychology and Neuroscience at Dalhousie. I think that still applies. Dr. Simon Cherry, how are you?
Fine, thank you, Sheldon.
Glad to have you on the broadcast this afternoon for this particular issue. And I'd said just before the break, this pretty much is what my grade 9 health teacher said. If you're consuming multiple substances, you have the effects of the drug, the alcohol, and the combined effects of the drug and the alcohol. So there are 3 different factors at play on how it will intoxicate you. Is that what you're saying?
Your teacher was correct, and he or she was not alone in sharing that concern. In advance of legalizing cannabis in Canada, a number of best practice recommendations were assembled, and one of them was to be very careful not to encourage co-use of cannabis and alcohol.
So is there a chance, though, that, a separate entrance, that's a segregated product, a visual barrier, that, in fact, they can achieve this without actually having a separate building?
Those may very well be mitigating factors, but I still think that context counts. The situations we find ourselves in can have a strong influence on our behavior. For example, in your own fridge, if you store the ketchup next to the mustard, you're more likely to combine these substances on your burger. They're more likely to end up in your body. And I think oftentimes we underestimate the influence, the importance of context. If in seeking out some alcohol, you get exposed to cannabis advertising, you get exposed to cannabis products, you're much more likely to end up using cannabis. And let's take a look for a minute at the stats as they pertain to Nova Scotia. We've got about 75% of Nova Scotians who are drinking alcohol, whereas we've got only about 15% of Nova Scotians who are using cannabis. And so as many people end up in the liquor store, many more people are now going to be exposed to cannabis advertising and products.
Even with that barrier, the physical barrier, that smoke glass between the 2 sections?
It's clearly there. It steps away. And it's advertised in quite an appealing manner. Curiously, unfortunately, our government seems to be promoting cannabis use, even though non-promotion strategies were clearly recommended. We've got our government who's branding pot use with some pretty appealing words like relax, unwind, center, and enhance.
Is there any scientific basis to those labels?
There are possible positive effects to cannabis use. I don't think anyone is especially concerned about an occasional pot smoker who might recreationally use the drug, say, once a week in a social setting. But there are some more sinister words we might attach to cannabis use as well. And I don't know why our government is emphasizing words like relax and enhance and ignoring words like couch locked or panicky, because those words are also very relevant to cannabis use.
I'm only laughing because, that probably wouldn't help sell it. And I think that's what's going on here. They're in the market. They're downplaying what the revenue will be. They also downplay the health effects of smoking. So,
sadly, I think that there are short-sighted economic motives at work here. Keep in mind, though, all Nova Scotians are going to end up bearing the costs from compromised health if more and more Nova Scotians start using cannabis, especially using cannabis in a hazardous way.
We've got as our guest on the broadcast this afternoon, Dr. Simon Cherry. He is a registered clinical psychologist. We're talking about co-locating and how it is perhaps a dangerous idea for some. And I did want to get back to that issue about people who are struggling with alcohol. We had a guest on to start our broadcast, a musician who said for 30 years he self-medicated with alcohol. I didn't ask him specifically about his drug use. He referenced it, but again, it's illegal, so we didn't want to talk about that. I know that's a silly answer. But Dr. Sherry, Dave is here. He's got a question about edibles. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, there was something in the news past couple of days about this young girl that ate a chocolate bar, and she had 15 pieces, where one piece was like enough for a dose of, for an adult. So, with these pot companies making edibles, what do you make of the whole idea of them making gummy bears and suckers? Are they trying to teach adults that it's a fun product, or are they trying to dodge the age thing, or what do you make of that?
All right, Dave, thanks for the call.
You raise a great point. And I think we have to be very careful about the route of administration when it comes to cannabis. Probably the worst way you could ingest cannabis would be by putting burnt plant matter in your lungs. I think on a common sense basis, we could imagine that if you repeatedly inhale and hold in burnt plant matter in your lungs, it could have a negative impact on respiration. So there is a place for edibles because it helps bypass that smoking route. But you have to be very careful with edibles because oftentimes people misunderstand or misread the potency and the dosing when it comes to those edibles. The other thing I'd want to be really clear about is the best approach to cannabis, the no-risk approach to cannabis, is to not use cannabis.
That's something, though, that a government has in some ways become elected on, an issue that they said they would decriminalize. It turned into a legalization strain, and now with the licensed producer model, they're saying, well, at least now you're guaranteed quality product without any kind of contaminants. Does that help in any way ease the issues that you brought forward?
Reluctantly, I will concede that there is some merit to this legalization idea. In fact, when I considered all the available evidence, I had to come around to a position where I support legalization. But what I support is a form of legalization that's done responsibly and done in accordance with evidence and consistent with best practices. And when it comes to the promotion of marijuana in this province and the co-location of marijuana and alcohol in this province, we're sadly falling short of acceptable standards.
I don't have to check Twitter. I'm sure someone is asking, yeah, but has this doctor ever smoked weed? Has the doctor ever smoked pot?
No time in the last 2 decades.
That's an answer. It is an answer. And again, some would feel that you're coming from a place where maybe you have no experience. So it's a fair question. The other question I was urged to ask by people are, do you have any investment? Are you invested in any way in marijuana stocks?
I have no investment whatsoever in marijuana stocks, but I can tell you I have a deep personal investment in the health of Nova Scotians. Beyond being a scientist, I'm a practicing clinical psychologist, and one of the problems I treat would be individuals who are struggling with issues of addiction, including cannabis misuse. And so not uncommonly, I will see people whose lives are greatly diminished by the overuse of cannabis.
Yeah, we got to keep reminding people that it's easy to say, oh, it's not addictive. And to your point, can you be addicted to having perhaps the effects of both the cannabis and the alcohol together?
We know that there are people who seem to get locked into a pattern of what you might call polysubstance abuse. There are a lot of people out there who can just use cannabis. But there are other people out there who do seem to become dependent on the effect of combining these different substances. And they may be combining tobacco and cannabis, alcohol and cannabis, cocaine and cannabis, and so forth.
Right.
So some people will often end up locked into some sort of a pattern of polysubstance abuse, and that's a much more difficult pattern to combat.
Yeah, I only crave that cigarette when I'm drinking. I've heard that. Appreciate the time and the thoughts put forward, Dr. Simon Sherry. Thanks for being on our show again today. Thank you.
Glad to be here. I appreciated the conversation as well.